Welcome to the Food Junkies Food Addiction Summit.
Here we aim to provide you with the experience, strength, and hope of professionals actively working on the front lines in the field of food addiction.
The purpose of this summit is to educate you and increase overall awareness about food addiction as a disease with abstinence as the solution.
Every day for the month of October, we are sharing one inspiring speaker or highlighted food preparation video from the incredible Tony Vassallo of Moda Nutrition Inc. and the Real Food Revival Movement.
We have 4 weeks of interviews with the leaders in the field of food addiction, clinicians who are working on the front lines, registered dietitians and nutritionists that are working toward bridging the eating disorder and food addiction camps, and people just like you and me.
Here we talk about all things food addiction recovery. Most importantly, how to thrive rather than just survive.
So stay positive, make a change for yourself, tell others about your change, and hopefully the message will spread.
And as Vera always says,
the power is ours.
Well, welcome back to another episode of the Food Junkies Food Addiction Summit. Today we have Molly Carmel, and we're so excited. We love everything she does. And can you give us a little introduction into like who you are professionally?
Yeah, I mean, can we just start? I love everything you guys do. It's like a love fest. Yes. So my name is Molly Carmel. This is probably the most stressful part of this interview today is me introducing myself. All that perfectionistic vibe comes up. My eating disorder is like, are you good enough? Okay, so my name is Molly Carmel. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I am the founder of Beacon by MC, which we're a clinic in New York City. We have online coaching. We have online groups. We have podcasts, all these things. And my goal in life, not just professionally, like this thing is all encompassed inside of my soul, is to help people to find their very best relationship with food and with themselves. And so that is all. So I come with a team of clinicians who help people, and we have all these different ways in which we try to help people achieve that. And I've been doing it for, I can't even believe it, but I've been doing it for 20 years. I've been doing some version of this work. I think the real food addiction work I've been doing for about 12 years. Like when I really moved into like straight food addiction was about 12 years ago. And it's the great love of my life. My job is the great love of my life. You know, I'm one of those people who is lucky enough to say that my job is absolutely my passion. And not many people can say that. And so there's really not a day where I'm like, ugh, work. I'm like, yes, work. Because I get to spend time with people who, you know, I see and I get, and I can show up and help. And I have this wonderful team of people who do the same, and just creating and trying to create different paths for people to find freedom is just like, what a job, as you guys know. But how is that? I'm like, and I'm like pretty well trained. Oh, sorry. One more thing. Sorry. I go right to like the spiritual. So here's the other thing. You know, I went to like a couple of Ivy League schools, got my degree there. I'm really, 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 really well trained in dialectical behavioral therapy. I've been classically trained in that for over a decade. Trained deeply in addictions. And also I have to say, like, I'm trained deeply spiritually, which I think is the part of the work that's really coming up right now. It's the part that I have a podcast called What You're Craving. And it's really the part that people are craving. I'm so excited by it. Like I was really fascinated by it, but I'm really finding that. And to me, you know, we don't get in touch with our soul. We're not a comprehensive solution.
Thank you for that introduction. And obviously,
you would have done it much better. But
no, not at all.
Introduce myself.
Not at all. We love having our guests do it because we feel like we maybe miss things sometimes. But can you take us back 12 years to that kind of like where you fully shifted into the food addiction work, and talk about like brief, you know, we've read your book, and if people haven't read your book, they need to go read Breaking Up with Sugar. You guys need to go listen to Molly's episode on the Food Junkies podcast to hear her story as well. So we don't really want to have you recap that so much as, you know, if you could start just from that 12-year ago mark, like that aha moment, this is food addiction, whatever, and then kind of bring us forward. Can you kind of talk about how that wove in with your professional life?
Yes. So can we pause for a second? Because a dog just got put in my, hi. Hold on, just like, because I just have to get him situated. Hi, bud. Hold on. I just have to close a. So yeah, I think it's a great question, because my professional path and my personal path run such parallel lives. And so what's really, I think, rather interesting is that so about 20 years ago, I was recruited to start the first ever therapeutic boarding school for adolescent obesity. And I was like, game in, game on, let's do it, right? Because when I was in my early 20s, I had worked at weight loss camps, and I'd gone to weight loss camps when I was 13 years old, I was sitting at a weight loss camp, like literally having the time of my life. But I had this little inkling in the back of my head, like, girl, you're going to go back after this and it's over. Like, this is just a little dream of you being in a body that you feel comfortable with and feeling in control of your food. And that's absolutely what happened. Miss Pekovic's home ec class, the button fell off of my jeans, popped off of my jeans. And I was like back in this horrible cycle of diet drama and trauma and food addiction that I didn't know was food addiction. So anyway, I started this boarding school, and this boarding school was rooted in calorie counting, self-monitoring, like very low fat eating. And like, that's just what I was trained in. And so when I started my own shack, when I started my own programs, I was like, all right, well, this is what I'm trained in. So like, let's do it. By the way, I was following the program and like living this horrible secret life where I like go home at night and like binge on like boxes of Frosted Flakes and like honey mustard pretzels, like unbeknownst to me. By the way, I've like having like eaten my way through bariatric surgery. It's a long story. You should go listen to the food. We're not going to go into it, but it's very fascinating. And I think relatable in the years that I've come out with my story. People are like, oh my God, me too. Oh my God, me too. And we all know that that's the solution to life, to be honest. So I'm sitting in this weight loss clinic that I've run, and doing therapeutically cognitive behavioral therapy. It's before I'm trained in DBT, whatever. And I'm starting to get trained in DBT, but not classically yet. And basically, like, people are not like really getting better. It's a lot of like white knuckle recovery, like, oh my God, well, maybe I'll go to 1100 calories. I'm like, I don't really, and like, there's some nutritionists helping us who are like sort of like enduring that with us. And basically what ends up happening is my binge eating really takes over, right? Thank God, right? Like, we never know the lessons we're learning. So I binge eating like literally is just like, oh yeah, I'm going to be heading this train and here's what's going to happen. So I'm like going home, like binging my brains out every night. And the thing that's actually happening for me is that I'm starting to gain a lot of weight. And it was just, listen, there's part of it that's cosmetic. There's part of it that was a lot of shame-based, like, you're coming to your weight loss therapist every week and she's like gaining weight, like not such good sales pitch. But also the double life of that is for me was too much to bear, right? Like, I'm like, oh, okay, like, let's talk about the food. Like, let's chain your binging. Let's talk it through. Let's figure out what the triggers were. And I'm like going home and doing the thing. So it's just like a very raw soul moment. Point being, my brother at that time was on paleo. And so I'm gaining weight. I'm like in deep shame. And also, by the way, I'm like binging at work one day and it goes down the wrong tube and I get caught throwing up at work. Like, so these are some like pretty solid bottoms. So my brother's on paleo and I'm like, I need a quick fix right now. And so I start paleo. And while I'm doing paleo, I'm like, I'm detoxing. I'm an addiction therapist. I'm like, I'm detoxing. Like, this isn't like, I never end up doing paleo. I really believe wholeheartedly that you eat beans and you eat fruit and you drink milk and you do all of these things. Like, well, I actually really believe you do what works for you, to be honest with you. Self-determination is the key to all of it. But anyway, so all this is happening and I'm like watching this, and the freedom that I got from after I started to, listen, I was protecting sugar with my life, in my lifetime. It's like, I never, ever, ever was like, I'm going to give up these Snackwell cookies. Like, so it came to pass that I was like, oh my God, I'm a food addict. And oh my God, I got to go find some people to teach me about this. And I got Marty Lerner and I really got blessed. To know that I'm in my destiny is really to know who taught me all of this, Nikki Glantz, all these people. And I'm very dear friends with them, to this day. They're my mentors, my colleagues. And I got to tell you, I literally walked into work one day and I made a new clinic. I lost a lot of patients, but I didn't care it's like evolve or die. Like if there's something better that's going to help people. And frankly, a lot of the people who were really struggling along with me were like, oh, this is it. This is the thing. So is that answering the question? That's my relation. And like, by the way, like I haven't had sugar or flour for 12 years, like the day that clinic switched, like so did I. And it's so funny the way that we protect our substance, right? Because I got to tell you, that's the smartest thing I ever did in my life. I got to tell you, that's the smartest thing I ever did in my life. And I was protecting it and the blind spots. No, it's not the sugar. Oh, it's this. Oh, I'll try this pill. Oh, I'll try this. That it was like, and it was just there the whole time. It was just there the whole time. So
I have an interesting question on that then. Like, do you find the individuals you work with, are they also information obsessed? And is this part of that diet drama and trauma? Because I know when Molly and I have worked with other substances, nobody says like, what's happening with my liver if they're alcoholic, right? They're like, what's going on with my liver right now? Whereas food addicts are like, want to know about the hormones. They want to know about the neurotransmitters. They want to know about so much information. Do you think that's like that denial piece where they're still looking for that magic pill or that quick fix? Like, what do you think?
Well, I'm not sure it's a denial piece. I actually, listen, I think that I also don't think drug abuse comes with so many quick fixes that people have been completely victim shamed for, right? So I have to say, like, I think it's very honorable people. I mean, and I think it's very valid, right? If you're like, no, like, why are you going to help me? I take this work so seriously, and I say this also to people, anybody watching a summit really needs to take a deep breath and remember that they have sovereignty over their recovery. Because in these summits, people get completely hijacked. Oh my God, should I be keto now? Wait, but she said dates were okay. It's like, you are the ultimate authority on your recovery. And that's that, right? So I think when people come with those questions, like, listen, I'm going to honor that with you, right? Like, and because I think myself, like I had to really learn about this thing because it was like not a pleasurable idea, the idea that I'm going to give up sugar and then flour on top of that. So I think with substance use, it's like, and listen, I have to say in the substance use world, like abstinence is not the only way now either, right? There's a lot of sober curious. There's just it's a very different world these days. And there's actually very good information on what it's doing to your endocrine system, what it's doing to your nervous system, what it's doing to your gut health. So I have to say, like, at least my experience of who I encounter, like I encounter people who are like, this ain't their first rodeo. And I think rightfully so. They're like, what are you? And I think I actually encounter people who have tried to be abstinent from sugar and flour in a very restrictive way. That's actually a very restrictive diet. And they're like, I've already tried this. Like, why in the world do you think you're going to help me? And so I take it. I don't find it to be denial in any way. I find it to actually be an outcome of the trauma of trying to find a solution for so long and going to people that are not helpful.
I love that. I love that answer so much. And I think it rings so true too, because I was also in the same boat. I wanted to know why, if I'm going to give up these things, what are the valid reasons, right?
Yeah. And I think the part with sugar and flour, Clister, is that there are deep emotional parts of binging. Like, I'm a therapist, right? So there's deep emotional trauma-based, right, parts of this, but the science is very helpful to us, to be honest, right? Like, you want to understand what this is doing to your liver. You want to understand like why you shouldn't be drinking fruit juice. Like, you understand all this stuff. Like, I have really great answers to that. Like, you want to understand like why you can't stop eating at night. Like, we got to dig deep for that one. So I'm a big fan of people knowing. It's third chapter of my book's all the science of it. It's not because it's so. You guys had Michael Moss on your podcast. I had Michael Moss on my podcast. Michael Moss, who wrote the book Hooked, like, you want to feel like this ain't your fault, go read books. You know what I mean? Like, Michael Moss is just like, oh yeah, you guys didn't have a shot. Like, yeah. I love that book so much.
Yeah, there's nothing more empowering, right? To know like, okay, I didn't have a choice in this, but now I do have a choice.
Oh,
and this is what I know.
Right.
And this is how I'll do better.
Yeah, subconscious moves to the conscious as the minute we have the choice, right? So even subconscious information, we don't have information. Now we have information. Now we have choice, and choice is key. Life.
So how do you work with clients then now in your current day practice? What are some things that you find work really well? What are some things that maybe you tried and you now know it's not so helpful?
Yeah. So I think in the very beginning, so I think I have to say one of the reasons I wrote Breaking Up with Sugar, I mean, writing a book is like a super hard task. And, so for me, the current literature that was available on food addiction did not suffice for me. There was not a book before I wrote Breaking Up with Sugar that I would have recommended, because I found the literature, and even the like I was, like I have a very mainstream book, and all the mainstream books were either very much like, what are you feeling, and then like no plan, or they were very deeply planned that you couldn't follow, or they were like break up with sugar, but like also like maple sugar dates, like you're fine. And then I think most of all, I think that the ones that were sort of the most offensive to me as a recovering food addict were the ones that were like 3 meals, they're square, you only may measure, no coffee, no gum, no this, no that. And I'm like, this is not like, I'm not giving up sugar and flour to live the life of a postage stamp. I do that in addiction. Thank you very much. Right. And I'm not getting rid of my addiction to have a different, much more punishing God of my understanding, which is this like unforgiving, you're a bad person if you relapse, like what's wrong with you? There's only one way to do this. And that to me was what most of the book said. So, and by the way, like in many ways, like what one of the main reasons I wasn't willing to give up sugar and flour is because the way that I understood it through the 12 steps was that there was just this very rigid way to do it. And I'm like, that's just like not my brand. Like I'm a curly haired, like kind of, sort of crazy girl. I'm proud of it. And like, it's not going to fly with me. So I did a lot of the research that I found, so in the beginning, I think I was very like a lot of the clinicians and coaches that I know, which is my own stuff was really interfering with my relationships with my patients. You have to do it this way. If you can't do it this way, you can't do it. You can't do it this. And it's like, that's, that happens a lot in therapy. And so I think, sort of as I evolved in my own work, and I think as I saw what worked for me and I saw what worked for others, that's like, listen, first of all, somebody tells you that there's one way, run away. Somebody says to you, you can't eat fruit. Like, run away. You decide whether or not you can eat fruit. Like, that's the deal. My opinion. Sorry. I'm not sorry actually at all. Can't so clear on that. But I think that there is the only research that we know, right? Because there's research on everything. There's research on keto, there's research on vegan, there's research on it being good, there's research on raw food being great for you, there's research on raw food being terrible for you, like whatever. There's no research on sugar being bad for you, for being good for you, by the way, right? But the only research that we have in this field in addictions and eating disorders, and frankly in weight loss, if that's where you are, is that self-determination is key, is that you making the determination of what works for you is the only thing that works. And so my practice has become, and the practice and the women, women happen to work for me, the people that I train to be helpful in this is that period, right? Like it's very much about creating motivation internally. It's very much, listen, facts are facts, but better that you eat less than you eat more, right? So, and something in harm reduction sort of has these three. First of all, the ultimate goal of harm reduction is abstinence, right? People forget that completely. So someone will say to me, well, I only had 2 donuts and I usually have a dozen. And I'm like, great. The only thing better than 2 donuts is no donuts, just a high reminder, right? And in the neural pathways, especially, something's always better than nothing. Something usually leads us to more, right? If somebody tells you that there's one way, run away. And I think that there's a lot of interference in all of this abstinence-based work. And believe me, and I tell you this as a 1,000% abstinent person. I mean, I guess I drink coffee and sometimes I go out to dinner and I'm not like, what's in the dressing? Like, I'm just going to eat the dressing, or I'll have like white rice with sushi. But generally, I'm a very abstinent person personally. And I just know that you can't help somebody who isn't sitting with you. And you can't help somebody who's sitting with you in deep shame. And so there is this parallel process that needs to happen when you're helping people, that you have their wisdom with you, right? And you cannot be feeling shame and being in wisdom at the same time. It's absolutely impossible. And so, And I think that the other thing that's happened, and which I, speaking to your question, closer, is that like, I think people come in distrusting in the relationship with themselves, right? Like I have like these large group coachings. I start every single session, like hands on your heart. I believe I can heal. I am healing. I believe, it's like we need to be integrating our spirit and reprogramming a lot of the language that we have, which can only be reprogrammed by reprogramming. And like, I just think this, for me, like the traditional way that food addiction was happening when I walked into the industry, there's just no possible way it would have worked for me. Honestly, it's just like full abstinence is like, wasn't my jam. And I needed to find my own path. I didn't do it with help, by the way. But I think I'm very committed, especially over a decade into it, because I think the industry is filled with people who are like, you're like a heroin addict with sugar. I'd be like, go fluff yourself. I'm out of this treatment. Like, and I've heard that 1,000 times across the board. And I'd be like, this is not helpful to me. Right. And so I think it's about, really loving people better in many ways and supporting them better. And I wouldn't call myself a nice person. I'd call myself an accurate person. I'm fierce. I'm not always like, yeah, like, it's not okay if it's not aligned with your goals, but you're the driver, we're the GPS. That's that.
Yeah. So in that same vein, what do you then think it has been, the unique offering that you've brought to the clinical field of food addiction?
I mean, I think that's the one. I was just on the Sugar Summit and he said that to me. I mean, I think I'm really one of the first people that's like, it's okay not to be fully abstinent. Like, here's what I think is like, I can't believe like this is groundbreaking, by the way. Can I just say that? Like, cause I really can't, like, people say to me like, wow, like, so you're a harm reduction food addiction person. The ultimate goal of harm reduction is abstinence. And I'm like, well, yeah, I don't know that there's another way to do this work, because do you think like all that does is promote people to lie to you? Like, right? Like, so I think most of us are, harm reduction people who, like just have our patients lying to us, which is promoting that diet drama and trauma, promoting that they can't do it. But I think, yeah, I'm the first person to say, I just had a clinician once and she was treating a woman who was very obsessed with eating multigrain Cheerios. And my clinician sat in session. Brought her to supervision, I think after their 4th session. And she's like, she's got to stop eating these multigrain Cheerios. And I'm like, well, what if you just examine the relationship with multigrain Cheerios and talk about how it makes her feel instead of telling her to stop eating them? Like, I just don't think I'm going to promise you something. The only way that you're going to win this thing is to not have a client. Right. And then I just think every time you lose a client to treatment, you've now put another, nail in their coffin of not believing that they are allowed to have full recovery from an addiction. And I think that's like a sin in many ways. And let me tell you something, I am imperfect. I've done it. I mean, there are Facebook groups that talk about what a horrible person I am, which I think is what happens when you get some exposure. Listen, sometimes you just got to be the, what is the quote? It's okay.
The villain in somebody else's story.
Stop it, Molly. Yeah. Are we just like that? I love it. Yeah. Somebody's got to be the villain in someone's story. I mean, I think it's just, the price of being more well-known is that, but that's okay. Like, I pray, I love everybody who I've ever treated. And like, I'm a fallible person, aren't we all? Like, that's like part of my own personal work, which I think has really impacted my relationship with food. It's like self-forgiveness. Like, if we can't be self-forgiving, like, I'm not a bad person. I'm just a person who's made mistakes. Like, and so it is.
Right. So will you explain just a little bit more about what harm reduction looks like in this world of food addiction? Like, what can you give us just maybe like an example of, how you might take a client through harm reduction, or what that looks like initially,
I'll give you
process.
Sure. I'll give you 2 really good examples. There's a whole book in there's a whole chapter in my book on harm reduction that's called Finding the Gray. And I actually think when you're reading a book to not be addressing harm reduction. So I was in coaching with this girl last week, and so she was saying, well, first of all, like, I don't really think flour, I'm really confused if flour is really that big of a deal. Right. And I said, well, I don't know if it's a big deal. Tell me about how you ranked on the food addiction scale. She said, I was a 12 out of 12. And I said, oh my gosh, me too. I said, so in that way, it's likely that like, I can't even have like almond flour really like I can't, whatever. And I said, so I want you to take a minute and really think about, like, perhaps you just want to try that. Because if it doesn't work, you can always go back to eating flour, but maybe it's actually the purpose. And then she said this thing, this is where harm reduction comes in. She said, she said, I can't really stop overeating, but I'm overeating, things that are okay. That's her language, not mine. And she, I'm overeating cheese. I'm drinking too much milk. And she, and she really wanted to be releasing weight. And I said, oh my gosh, I totally get that. And I said to her, listen, when you look at the food plan in my book, do you just want to punch me in the face? Because it's just like, not enough food. And she kind of, she was kind of like, she kind of nodded yes, but like didn't want to offend me, which, by the way, like it's very hard to offend me. And I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to double the food plan. I want you to double the food plan, because it sounds like it's really hard for you to have barriers on what you eat, and yet you need barriers on what you eat. That's a dialectic, right? Those are two opposing ideas. So that's a move of harm reduction, right? So I'm not like, you need to weigh and measure all of your food and it has to be exactly 4 ounces and you got to go to the book. I'm like, because that's, all that's going to do is reinforce our hopelessness. And I believe hopelessness is the start of your future, right? You're not looking into the right lenses. And you got to see like the relief on that. Also, 3 other women that night were like, oh my God, thank you. I'm going to try that because I really can't follow the food plan either. And I've done that a lot of times with people, especially people who have a lot of weight to release, that you just kind of up that food plan and they're like, oh, cool. And then they kind of gradually bring it down. Same thing with someone who says, I'm not giving up wine. There's no way I'm giving up wine. I'm like, cool. Where can we meet on that? How many glasses? 4? Great. Let's try it there. Right. Like it's all of this, right? I need, and this is a big one I used to get into when I first started. There's somebody say, I'm going to Paris and I need to have a croissant. And I'd be like, you're not having a croissant. Like you're going to die. You don't know if you'll come back from that relapse. Like all that patriarchal stuff from the 12 steps. I'm like, and I would get into a battle and usually either lose a patient or teach a patient to lie to me. Like hard no. Now I'm like, all right, let's talk it through. I had one guy who's like, completely absent. He said, I want a pizza on my birthday. I'm like, cool, let's talk it through. Like, who am I to say? Like, like there's just this rigidity around what abstinence is. And I think all it does is make people not want to get abstinent.
Well, okay. So we're 100% with you, Molly, on board. Like we are harm reduction.
So, we are. Change this industry.
So one of my biggest pet peeves is people hear that I'm a harm reduction clinician. And then I get these private messages or this messaging sent to me. That's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound.
It's a lie though. That's their own, but first of all, that's their own stuff, right? Because if I've learned anything in my life, like being someone who doesn't drink and someone who doesn't eat sugar and someone who doesn't eat flour, when someone has a problem with how I'm behaving, it's their problem, right? And so that is, that is the vibe of people who've come to me that said, he said to me, I was like a heroin addict with sugar. I'm like, wow, well, you came to me, so why'd you not with him anymore? I would say that if someone is unwilling to get a stitch in their gun wound, that it would be better that we put some towels on their gun wound, and then maybe eventually they would let us stitch them. That's what I would say.
Amazing.
And then I'd ask them, how are they feeling today? And if they wanted to process anything, because that seemed like they were very angry and scared.
It's the work, right? That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So one of our questions we usually ask is like, what do you find in individuals who are going to do well?
Can I just say one more thing about that?
Yeah, you can.
The first thing I ask people when I treat them is what their life worth living goal is. Mm-hmm. And then eventually within the work, we get to what their guiding values are. Right. And so I think if that's a clinician saying, you're putting a Band-Aid on a gun wound, it's not like I am like, like when you don't wear your seatbelt in the car, like if you're not in alignment with your goals, like I'm going to sound like that in session. I'm like, interesting. Can we talk more about that? Wait, can we talk more about that? Wait, help me understand. Let's get that link together. Like, where are we? Okay. Can we do something little today? Like, I'm a very annoying behaviorist, when you're not doing the thing that you want to be doing for yourself, or we're going to be readjusting that life worth living goal to fit where you are. Right. You know what I'm saying? So it's not to say that I'm sitting there like, wow, how was the croissant? Tell me more about that. Like, I have no tolerance for you not showing up big for yourself and your life if that is your goal. But I'm not one to say, just because I don't eat sugar and flour, that like that needs to be the way that you do it, right? I'm just going to give you some information. I'll highlight the idea that that's not really in consistent with your goals, and like see where we can go there. I find it to be fascinating work, to be honest with you. And I have this Brad Reedy used to be one of my supervisors. He's incredible. I did a podcast with him. He's one of my dearest friends. And his therapist, Brad just has, Brad really helped me in my own being a therapist to have this idea, like if somebody is doing something, there's a very good reason why. And it's not always because they're a heroin addict, because even people who are shooting heroin up their arms have a very good reason why they're doing that. And if we don't get curious about that, then we're not doing our work as clinicians, period. Coaches or whoever you are, and you might need more training, because those are really hard conversations to have. And just knowing about food is not going to be able to get you there. Okay, yeah. Now I'm done.
No, that was so good. And anyone, like, what you're craving, I can't remember. It was early on in the season where you talked to Brad.
Well, he's like life. He's like life to me. I mean, he's just, and he has his own podcast, which is amazing. He just is a really wonderful therapist, and he's done so much work with me in my time. So
pass it on.
And if your therapist doesn't have a therapist, go get a new therapist.
Yeah. That's what we all say. So we usually ask, what is the secret to success? The individuals you work with, and when people are going to show up and they're going to do well. But I think you kind of highlighted that self-determination is one of those things.
So is desperation. Actually, the other two, honestly, in my experience, like the more desperate someone, honestly, it's less self-determination. It's really more willingness, right? Like to me, but usually willingness comes with a very high level of desperation, because in DBT, there's this great kind of statement in DBT that, when someone is behaving willfully, you got to ask yourself, what's the threat? Like you say to them, like, what's threatening you from being willing in this moment, right? So when when somebody's super desperate, they're really on their last legs, and they have I am obsessed with grace, like obsessed. And when I see someone in group coaching, I'm like, go do this right now, because you have about 24 hours right now that your addiction is going to come back. Like your addiction's at like the supermarket and you're like locked in, and like get out of the house, like run, just get out, get into the middle of the pack, go. So I really do think that, of course, I think the more willing somebody is, but I want to say it in a different way, because I really hate using 12-step language, because I think 12-step uses 12-step language and I don't need to. But I think when somebody is really open and available and really willing to put all of their thoughts and beliefs and this diet drama and trauma aside, and really give it a go, is actually when you can create self-determination. When we have all of these alternative voices, you're not enough. It's just like, it's really why the other thing that I've really started to do is I teach this spiritual fitness class where we do these like intensati, where we do these like mantras, like I am enough, and we're doing movement, and it's going through our mind, body, and our soul. And it sounded so cheesy to me before I kind of got bullied to do it. And then I did it, and I'm like, oh my God, we all need to be really, like, the rewiring can't just happen in our minds. Like, it has to happen in our bodies. So I think that this ability to just for a little bit of time, set aside these old narratives and be willing to write new narratives for ourselves, and not, and really, like, that's really, I think, what works. Like, self-determination needs willingness. Like, you can't be self-determined if you're like stuck in this like novel and the story of like that you're not worth it and that I need to save you. Like, someone says to me, just tell me what to eat. That's the last person I'm going to tell what to eat, right? Because then I'm about to take all their power, and I'm not going to do that anymore.
So
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. But I don't know if you find this when we're working with individuals, they don't know how to trust themselves anymore.
Yeah, but so the best kind of parent is a dolphin, right? Because a dolphin parent, like, sometimes swims behind their child and nudges them up, sometimes swims beside their child and just roots them on, and sometimes swims in front of their child and protects them from danger, right? And I think part of it is this is where harm reduction comes in, honestly, Carissa, because if you're telling someone, yeah, you're going to weigh and measure all your food this week, you're only going to eat 3 times a week. And like, well, guess what you're about to do? You're about to fully enforce the idea that they can't trust themselves, right? So that's why I said to that girl, double the food plan this week, because she'll be able to do that. And then she'll start to trust herself. And then she'll probably get out of I think, in my opinion, from what I understood that she was eating, I think that some of that haze that comes with the binging part will start to die down, and then her brain will come together, and so on and so on and so on. Like, self-trust is a process, and it takes action, but it takes like reasonable goals that you can achieve, right? And a lot of it takes like a lot of leaps of faith. But it has to be like sometimes really little. For people who have a lot of diet drama and trauma, there's got to be really teeny little doable leaps of faith. And it's like, oh my God, yes. I have this sty on my eye, and someone in my Facebook group, I was talking about in my Facebook group this morning, and she's like, make sure you put hot compresses on your eye. I was like, oh my God, if being abstinent from sugar and flour is probably anything, it's actually how to take care of myself. I'm like, I basically have been living, like after this, I'm back like on the bed with the thing on my eye. Like, I am so reliable to myself these days. It is like, yes, like I don't gain weight, like all my clothes fit all of the time. I feel wonderful in my body. Like, food doesn't control me, but oh my God, the idea that I am a reliable partner in my life with myself. And I was just talking about myself this morning. I was like, I was just saying all these great things about myself, which is like a miracle, because I was mostly just like a suicidal, hateful person while I was active. It's just amazing. And I think that is really the key to it, but it takes time. Like, patience is truly a virtue.
Yeah. It just reminds me of, like you were saying, like the food plan thing, or the, like, can I do it? Whatever. And it's so funny because I find that like when I meet clients with like, well, what do you think? Or what do you want to do? Or what sounds reasonable to you? Right. And like, I just it's like they want to set me up to shame them, because right. It's like the
that's
behavioral
the trauma though.
Yeah.
But like, and anything we know about trauma, that is where actually, I mean, there's so many parts of diet drama and trauma that it's like, it's a really cute phrase that I use, but it's actually legitimate. Like, and we know that about trauma. Like, we're always going to try to, until it's healed, we're always going to try to recreate the traumatic experience. Right. And that is literally it. Right. And I think there's like, and of course, like the science on negativity bias and everything. And that's why the minutes I was just tell me what to eat. Can you just tell me what to eat? I'm like, nope, definitely not now. Like, I'm not becoming the villain in this story. Promise you that. Like, I love you. Like, we're in a relationship. Like, no, thank you, but I will help you.
Yeah, absolutely. It always surprises clients when they're like, oh, you can just watch the relief wash over them, like they didn't even know that's what they were looking for. And you don't even like take the bait. And then they're like, oh, visible.
No, I have a patient now where she's like, well, I just want to yell at you and tell me what to eat, but I know you're not going to tell me what to eat. I'm like, well, right. Because that's not even what this is about. She's like, fine. I was like, what do you want to eat? And then we like make a food plan. And she's like, oh, fine. Hard to take responsibility, ain't it?
Dang it. Okay, Molly. So we want to know, what do you do for your food addiction recovery every day? Like, what are some of the things that you do to take care of yourself and walk that recovery life?
Okay. Well, so I have a lot of years doing this, right? So I think what I do today is not what I used to do. But I have to say, pretty subconsciously, or pretty it's very ingrained in me to actually like think about what I'm going to eat every day, where I'm going to eat it, how I'm going to get it. Like today, actually, like I don't have a lot of food, so I'm like, going to run out and get like a salad. Like that's actually a very ingrained part of my life. And there's a very ingrained part of my life that's like, when am I getting to the grocery store? Like that's a very, like the food part is a very ingrained part of my life. Like every morning, I think in some ways, and sometimes even a few days ahead, right? Because I'm going to a retreat this weekend. So I'm like, okay, well, like, how am I going to get lunch? Like, when am I going to eat dinner? Do I need to do any prep? Like, that's a very, and I don't actually find it aversive at all. I think it's actually the most loving thing that I do is have a little, I was staying with my sister for a couple months out east in the beach. And I would just like make everyone a salad every day. Like my brother-in-law's like, I'm obsessed with you. We've never been healthier in our lives. Cause I'm just like, and I'm making a salad at like 8 a.m. and they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, I'm making lunch because this is the only time I have to make lunch. Like they're normies. So like they just skip lunch, or they're like, eat some chips. Like, they're just like, this is amazing. Like, thank you so much for living with us. So that's a big part of it. And then I think, I tend to my spirit, because when I wake up in the morning, like as an addict, I really identify as an addict. The plug is in the most negative outlet that exists. Like, my plug, I wake up, that plug is like, you can't do this. You just stay in bed. You're not worthy. And I'm like, okay. So we're not going to be identifying with that God today. That's my lower self, right? That's my lower self. It's my addiction. There's so many different ways to say you don't need to use God, but I sometimes do. So I'm like, okay, let's get the plug out and let's get the plug into a new plug. So I do one of a few things, right? Like, I probably do 3 of these things that I'm about to say to you. I really do pray every day. I pray, I usually do a meditation, and then I'll do something like either a breath work or a journal or a chant. Those are like, so I do something like that because I really need to get connected to my highest self, right? I call that God, but like, there's a God inside of me. I need, like, we got to clear away the roughage of the negativity. I got to get really into myself. And then I really try to move my body in some loving way every single day. I'm a real dog. And, there's a lot of research and so I'm not saying like, I'm running marathons. I used to weigh 325 pounds. Like, in fact, like, even when I teach intense Sati, like, I never jump. Like, you'll never see me teach an aerobics class and jump. Like, you want to do that to your body, like, that's on you, right? And I think there is a part of like getting out into nature and taking some breaths. And there's a lot of, there's like research that says that, consistent exercise and this loving exercise is as good as a Zoloft. So count me in on that. And I'm very connected. I have a very I have a power circle of people who support my recovery. I speak to at least 1 or 2 of them every single day.
And you have a great Facebook group as well, where you just get to help lift people up, right? That connection is, there's nothing better.
Oh, I was just talking about that today in the group, because I believe like, your healing needs to be as big as your problem, like, and to get into the middle of any pack that you identify with means that you never, that means that you're going to be held through it. And it's a very brave thing to do, be connected, but it's the opposite of addiction. So here we go.
Yeah, 100%. So what are your hopes for food addiction treatment and recovery in the future?
Well, I wish access to care was easier. And I wish that, this toxic tribalism that's happening in the diet, in the food world, right? And toxic tribalism meaning that people are so incredibly attached without any ability to find a middle path is really, it's overwhelming to me. And I say that mostly about like this intuitive eating community and this health at any size community that is so non-inclusive. So like, you're a bad person if you can't like eat peanut butter out of a jar. You're a bad person if you want to be like releasing weight, like there's something wrong with you. And it's so, functional in our country. So I guess I would just really hope, I mean, listen, I'm all about dreaming big, but this is a huge dream, that people would just leave everybody alone and let them find their own path. You want to release weight, I think you have every right to. Should it be in a healthy way and to a healthy body, to like and I'm not saying like if you're 110 pounds and you want to weigh 72 pounds, like that's not loving. But I do know for me, when I was 325 pounds, it certainly was not a loving relationship with food that was keeping me at that weight, right? And so I guess I would just wish that people could integrate food addiction in a way that helps them to heal, right? And it didn't have to be this like tribalistic, like no coffee, and if you eat any white rice, like I once had a sponsor in OA that dumped me because I ate white rice and I ate protein bars. Like that is not love, right? That's her stuff. And so I just, the toxic tribalism, I guess I would hope would be just kind of softening a little bit, and that like people could just find their own paths with their own people. And I want to say sometimes people actually really need that very, very intense approach. I see that in substance use. I see that in a lot of things. And so I'm not saying it doesn't work for everybody. It just, nothing works for everybody. So we have to allow people to find solutions.
What do you think is going to be the way to do that? Like, what do you have any idea? I mean, you interviewed the creator, basically, of intuitive eating movement. I love that conversation because it was just absolutely.
It could make me cry thinking about it. Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that the way that we're going to change it is to self-ignite. Like, I don't think it's going to I think it's about self-igniting. And what I mean by that is finding the fire and the power within yourself, because, and I do get to direct message and interact with a lot of people who are like, I know that method doesn't work for me. And I was like, I know too, it almost killed me. Like, I'm with you. And stop, then just turn it off, and then you can come to a middle path. I mean, frankly, to be honest, like, I eat very intuitively as a food addict. Like, that's my life. Like, I'm not like, oh my God, like if for some reason I go to the salad place and it's closed, I'm not like, oh my God, it's McDonald's. Like, it's just life, right? Like, I go out to dinner, I live a huge, beautiful life very intuitively. Sometimes I eat more, sometimes I eat less. Like, it's very possible, but I think it's like really shutting down the noise. This is why I say this about anybody in a summit. You got to shut down the noise, because the noise is the diet trauma, and you got to find what's going to work for you. Because I have to say, like, us coming out of abusive relationships with food is good for the world, because that means we're awake and we're alive and we're available to be of service, which is really what our whole world needs right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that was our whole hope with creating this summit, was that we would get to introduce so many different people who practice so many different ways. And that for any of the audience,
just remind people, like, you are the authority on your recovery. Like,
right.
If somebody's making you feel scared that you're not doing it right, run away from that.
Right.
Don't act on it immediately. Get quiet. Oh, why is this? What's going on with me right now? And that person saying I should be keto is getting me nervous. Breathe through that. Find the answer. Respond. Don't react. Like, I swear, after every summit, I do a coaching, and half of my coaching is undoing the summit that they were in. I'm very quiet about who summits I go on as a result of that. I did only 3 summits this year. I was invited to like 17. Like, I'm very quiet about it, and I really trust you ladies. So
yeah. And
shout out to you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. No, well, and that was the hope, right? Is you have that attraction. You hear that person that is speaking your language, and you're like, well, yeah, I could do that.
That's who you listen to, Claire. You know what
yes,
I mean? Like,
yes.
When you feel that way about listening to somebody, that's your teacher. When you're like, oh my God, am I a bad person because I'm eating fruit? Like, run from that. Like, run so fast, and then give yourself a hug. Like, you're okay. I promise. That's exactly right. Yes.
Yes. So we just want to thank you so much for being here, and just always being you and showing up like you.
Well, yeah, we can't help that, but not for everybody. But yeah, I love you guys. I could just sit and chill with you all day, as you well know. And I'm so grateful that you invited me. I'm so grateful to be a part of what you guys do.
Thank you for being here and being a voice. You have a platform that we only one day hope to achieve. And meanwhile, we're gonna keep propping you up, because you speak our language, and I know that I learn from you every time I hear you speak. So thank you again for joining us for this hour. We appreciate it,
guys. Love fest. Yes. Love you.
Thanks for joining us today on the Food Junkies Food Addiction Summit.
If you would like to hear more, tune in every Friday to the Food Junkies podcast, available on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Audible, and anywhere else you listen to your favorite podcast. Subscribe so you'll never miss a show.
Don't forget to pick up a copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies, which is available on Amazon.
If you have any additional questions, both Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals and work one-on-one with clients. Their websites and email addresses are available at foodjunkiespodcast.com.
As Vera always says, the power is ours.